our works don't belong to a particular place. Every work comes with a very strong narrative. For us, books, movies, I mean, cinema and music have been a very important part of who we are and how we look at things. We believe that architecture is not about finding a meaning in this drawing and putting something out. I think there needs to be an understanding of the context, the culture of the city, and so many other things. We've realized that we enjoy projects where we feel that the building and the landscape always existed. So that's when you realize that a lot of the times the responsibilities that come with greens or the way you look at architecture and landscape, it needs to be a stronger commitment from everyone. Architecture as a calling is an extraordinary expression of fulfillment.
A warm good evening from the Architect's Diary, and I extend a gracious welcome to TADPod. I'm architect Simran Khare, the co-editor at the Architect's Diary, and I'll let you know something about TADPod. So, what TADPod basically stands for. So, TADPod is an initiative by the Architect's Diary where we illuminate the remarkable journeys of leaders with architectural brilliance. Through TADPod, we focus on presenting curated insights from extraordinary individuals, shedding light on their creative process, exemplary philosophies, and exquisite contribution to the built environment. By featuring discussions with visionary architects, designers, and urban planners, TADPod seeks to broaden perspectives and shatter stereotypes. TADPod is more than just an interview series. It's a platform for thought leadership, inspiration, and action, driving forward the discourse on architecture and design in pursuit of a better and vibrant future for all. Today, we have with us architect Akshay Heranjal, the co-founder and principal architect of the Purple Ink Studio. It's an honor to have you, sir.
Thank you, Simran. Pleasure to
So,
be here too.
yes. A short brief about the Purple Ink Studio. In 2011, in Bangalore, Aditi Pai and Akshay Heranjal, with a very modest starting point and a completely new ground, were on an expedition to find a paradigm shift in the way designs were perceived. Along with Nishita Bhatia and Arpita Pai and a core of design associates, the studio has grown, bringing in varied skill sets to the process. Having a non-linear approach, they traverse through to create free-spirited architecture. While exploring art in all its forms, the stories and profound lessons it held served as a medium of reflection and inspiration for everyone. The firm is doing some exceptional work with a non-conventional approach to design, which blends user functionality with the modern demanded aesthetics. So, without a further ado, let's dive into a thoughtful and thought-provoking session with architect Akshay Heranjal. Hello, sir.
Yes, hi, Simran. Thank you for the introduction. I think podcasts like these help us dive in a little deeper as well. I mean, I use that as a way for some self analysis, and it's also interesting to sort of understand where we are because usually so busy with work that you don't usually get a time to converse and discuss on things. So, looking forward to this one.
Yes. So, to start with this interview, I would like to really understand your journey through architecture, like from the initial embrace of this field to being one of the innovative leaders in the architecture and design industry today. It must have been filled with a lot of rich experiences. So, could you share some of the key moments which have shaped this journey?
Uh, One of the things that I realized, I think we will be completing 14 years now. We started in 2011, and it took us about 12, 13 years to have one very major realization. Uh, the idea of roots, a sense of belonging, or where do we belong? I come from a small city called Hubli, but if I start tracing back my roots, I was not born there. I was born in Bangalore, but my family has always lived in Bombay. But and then they were part of the Kashmiri Brahmins. We speak Konkani, so we come all the way from Kashmir. About 300 years ago, we actually traveled down to Goa and then to coastal Karnataka, and then they sort of moved to Bombay and places around for work. This realization, in fact, it came to me about a year back when I was actually finding meaning in what we were doing, and I was trying to understand where do we come from, where is our sense of belonging. I think that was one of the most important realizations that I had, that our roots are actually adapted. It has always been adapted, because I realized as people, as community, also we've never been born and brought up or studied in the same place. I've done this in many, many different places, and so is uh, the idea of where I come from. And that's when I realized that our works are also like that. Uh, our works don't belong to a particular place. We find a way to sort of find ourselves into this conditioning of what the context holds. Like the way I live, I'm a Bangalorean, I'm a true Bangalorean, but at the same time, I know I've adapted myself to it. It's the same with our works as well. We find ourselves into that whole idea of context, trying to understand uh, how to situate ourselves in a particular project, and then we adapt ourselves, and then we start finding our ways to open our arms out. And that's how we are as people, because we come with incredible stories as well, because we're not from that same place. So there are a lot of stories that I would have carried. There are a lot of memories that I carry. It's the same with our work. Uh, every work comes with a very strong narrative. We're also trying to constantly uh, find strong narratives that we can go back and connect to memories and connect to the idea of India and so many other things. So I think this particular realization is possibly the starting point for us now. So I can talk to you about where I come from in terms of where I did my architecture, how we started, etc., etc. But I think for us, this is a defining moment for us as a studio, for me on a very personal level, of understanding that the idea of roots for us is with the fact that we have adapted it. It's not been a part of us, and we've adapted our roots, and now we're looking to open our arms up. So in a way, I feel this becomes a very important moment for us. And also, I mean, just to also add a little more thought on this, Aditi, who's my partner, and Nishita and Arpita, who are now partners, four of us run the whole studio together, also have the same line of thought, also have the same upbringing. We're all from very different cities, different places. So that was a very strong realization. Now, does that change the way we think? Not sure, but yes, it adds a lot of meaning now. We also realize that the works have also been like that. Our works subconsciously always was trying to find itself in that particular place with the culture, the context, the climate, and so many other things. So it's a very long answer to you asking me, how did you start or where did you come from? I said took us 300 years to reach here. So that's possibly the answer I can give you.
Right, right, right. Definitely. I mean, our roots definitely define the way we are going to live, the way we are going to work, and it defines all of our life, I would say. I mean, as you mentioned, that the coming from different parts of India, if you kept traveling, then I think that is something that shapes your personality also in a very different and unique way. And that is
True.
definitely, I think, reflecting in the work that you are doing also.
Yes. Yes, it
So,
does.
right. So when I look at your designs, I we can see that you strongly believe in embracing the non-linear approach towards design. So could you explain like what exactly do you mean by a non-linear approach and how does it help you better your design?
Yeah, again, I think I'm going to use this podcast or our discussion or our conversation as a means to sort of assess our own work, because it's interesting to sort of use this opportunity to also think about how someone like you is looking at us. Uh, we've realized over time that we want to look at projects that come with interesting briefs. in one way or the other, we realized that we were always inching towards or sort of finding ourselves closer to this sort of an idea that if you have an interesting brief, we will have an eccentric or an extraordinary story to tell, because that's something that we really believe in. We feel every project that we do has to have a very strong narrative. Every project that we do has to have a strong story to tell, something that's an important part of that whole process of how we envision our works to be. So when you call it non-linear, or when we've probably used that word many a times as well, saying our works have a very non-linear approach, it's talking about multiple uh, influences that come together
Right.
to define the way we look at things. So there is a very strong influence of uh, books that we read, works that we see, movies, that's cinema, and music as well. So for us, books, movies, I mean, cinema and music have been a very important part of who we are and how we look at things. And I think these influences, in a way, have also shaped the way we think. Uh, for example, uh, the works of this director called Park Chan-wook, who's a Korean director, has been a very important influence on my life in terms of the kind of movies he makes, or even Anurag Kashyap. We realize that the narratives that they've had is so local Indian, but there is this sort of a disruption that you see in the way they put things out. The idea of the process itself is so interesting. Even with Park Chan Wook, some of the movies, like maybe you can look him up, Old Boy, uh, and so many other movies. I mean, I've seen all these 14, 15 movies, and we are sort of obsessed with the kind of movies that world cinema has, and we use these as tools to understand and dissect architecture as well. It's the same with music. Our connect with music in terms of the rock music culture, to be more precise, has been so influential for us. Is the kind of narratives that, let's say, an album has, or the growth, or the thought process of a band that they have, also has played an interesting sort of influence on us. And all these are very non-linear. You look at movies; these are not those commercial movies that have a start and a song and whatever. Right? These are very disruptive in the way they sort of push you to think. Same with the works that we do. So I think the kind of influences that we've had on a very personal level is also slowly starting to reflect on the works that we do. And that's again, like I said, a realization which was always subconsciously there. So strong narratives need to define the work that we do. We believe in processes. We believe that architecture is not about finding a meaning in this drawing and putting something out. I think there needs to be an understanding of the context, the culture of the city, and so many other things. And then we dissect the brief in a way where we start finding a narrative that sort of becomes a part of it and slowly starts adapting itself as a part of that whole culture of that project. And I think that's the whole non-linear thinking that we're talking about, where there are multiple influences that sort of start defining how we look at each project. So I think that sort of talks about how we look at our work.
Right. I think inspiration definitely takes, the center stage when it comes to any work that you do, and especially architecture, because I think it's, shaping the way someone is going to live there for like the rest of their life, or many users, if it's a public project, many users are going to be accessing that place. So I think these inspirations definitely help us to better our designs and keep pushing our boundaries as well, I think, when it comes to designing part.
Absolutely. I think you always felt, that buildings need to have extraordinary storytelling.
Right.
When I say that, I'm talking about a more deeper meaning. I'm not talking about just talking or thinking about a context or a concept. I'm talking about the kind of language that sort of comes together for a particular project needs to be a deep dive of a lot of things.
Right.
And I think that sort of also tells you that then you need more meaningful projects or briefs that come with a lot of meaning,
Hmm.
then you can, sort of deep dive into a lot of things. And that's why one of the points that we realized in our life is to start looking at projects that come with interesting briefs. And then there's a way for us to give back.
Definitely. I think when we start to look at buildings or architecture as a living entity, I think that's where I think the transition also begins with our projects and our designs.
True, true.
So, as we are talking about your projects, as we mentioned about project briefs and storytelling, so considering the diverse typology that of projects that you have worked on, which is maybe that one project which has had an impact on you? Like, could you tell us about that project?
I think the first 10 years of our journey as a studio, a lot of our effort went into exploration, understanding, uh, and testing ourselves out and saying yes to a lot of things. And the next 5 years, we always thought should be with this idea of awareness of who we are, what do we actually believe in. And at this moment, we realize that we like to work from a place of happiness. And when I say that, I mean that we want to do projects that more and more are part of us, or like an extension of us, or how we think, which essentially means that if you are aware that this is what we like or this is how we look at things, then you start attracting those kind of projects, or it sort of becomes an important extension of who you are. And that's why the first 10 years went into exploration, where we did a lot of things, and we were obsessed with, looking at multiple thought processes, narratives, typologies, etc. But again, with the idea that there has to be a strong narrative that holds everything that we do. And because we were testing ourselves, because both Aditi and I come from this whole background of not having any architects in our family, and we started from scratch, coming from a different city to a place here and having worked with extraordinary people. We realized that the idea of finding the right narrative also needs to become an important way of how we explore. So even when we were exploring in the first 10 years, there was a very important idea of being able to tell a story, which was important for us. So we didn't let go of that. During that transition between the first 10 years and where we are right now in these 3, 4 years, we did a project called The Brick House. I think that was although there are moments where a lot of projects have made a very strong impact on who we are and how we think. I think Brick House is something that's extremely close to our heart, and I think that's a very small project that we did in coastal Karnataka in Bangalore, and I think we pushed the limits a lot. And I think that was one moment we realized the importance of having the right client. And I think that's one project that changed the way we think, because it allowed us to be who we are and told us the kind of value that people can bring in, right from the client who lives in Saudi but wanted to create this home for himself and his family in a place where he belonged, in this place in Bangalore. There were a lot of memories that were associated with his upbringing. Then comes the idea of executing an idea of how we thought of the project. You needed people again, and this was during the COVID. So the entire house has only brick and concrete and layers of plaster that were experimented as craft. So there's no paint in the whole house, and there's a consistency of material extremely monochromatic, extremely monolithic in terms of how we looked at it. It speaks of who we are. And the idea of executing something as complex as the brick house, you can look it up and you'll realize the complexity that's there in the way it was conceived. It's planned as a section. The whole house opens upwards. It has nothing to look outside, so it doesn't have windows that open outside. and it has only the sky and the earth, so it looks up, and it's in an urban setting. So although the client could actually afford and have a beautiful site near the beach or close to the sea somewhere in Mangalore, he chose to take a place in an area which was close to his heart, and he wanted to come back to that area. So there are a lot of sort of attachments in terms of or memories that the client had, and for us, the idea of people and memories became a very important point because the project was so complex. But at the same time, we were very clear to work with local people from that area and sort of establish this whole thought that we can do it. I mean, complex projects where the idea of just the structure and the brick when it needs to be perfect, it also needs to be uh, distributed to people in a way where it becomes a part of their, their process where they realize that they can make it happen. So that sort of allows this whole idea of passion to come into picture where they were driven to make it happen. So a lot of these things sort of makes it a very important project for us. Also, sort of culminating into this thought that we've realized that we like to work from a place of happiness, and that's the biggest learning that I can take away from that project.
The last point that you said definitely resonates with me also. So that part of being working from a place of happiness, I think definitely matters a lot. And if you're enjoying what you're doing, I think definitely when the challenges that come with it, even if there are some obstacles, we take it up and we just know that okay, I want to get through to this. So that helps us a lot.
That's true.
So, looking at your work, the relationship between landscape and built form appears central to most of your designs. So, how do you navigate this delicate balance between the natural environment and the architectural spaces to create this seamless integration?
Aditi, my partner, is a landscape architect. uh, a lot of our projects actually are initiated from this idea, like I said, finding a place of belonging, which essentially, in its truest form, talks about nature. So even in urban settings, we realize that there has to be a strong connect with the idea of the outsides. And it just doesn't mean about landscape in terms of greens or in terms of the trees that you see around, etc. I think it's a deeper connect that we're talking about. Uh, the idea that the transition between architecture and landscape has to be seamless was always part of how we looked at things. I think we are extremely simple people who always realize that nature is our biggest source of inspiration for a lot of things. At the same time, we are eccentric in the way we think. So we've found ways to abstract architecture sometimes to find its place in nature, and sometimes the nature takes over our work. Like, for example, we did this project called Project 58, which is a home in Bangalore. And the idea of architecture and nature sort of converges to a point where the nature is now literally taken over, and the building is less seen. Uh, we've always liked to push the boundaries in both cases. Uh, and one of the things we realize that we don't like our architecture to stand out too much. Although there's a very strong narrative, there's a very clear approach in terms of the vocabulary that's set in. It's still coming from a uh, very important thought process of many workings to have reached there. So it's not about making something just look good, but we realize that we like our projects to sort of merge or blend or sort of start finding its own meaning. We've realized that we enjoy projects where we feel that the building and the landscape always existed or coexisted. So I think that's our approach in most cases. Although it's difficult to sort of pull this off in urban projects, especially in Bangalore where the sites are getting tighter. it's still important for us to find a new meaning in it rather than looking at just simple planter beds and things like that. I think we're pushing a lot on productive greens. We believe that you should be able to grow your own food. There's a lot that we want to do in terms of giving back to the city as well. So there's a lot of work and thought happening back end, which may not be a direct relation with any of our projects that we're doing, but there is a lot of work that's happening in terms of giving back to the city, giving back to the nation. And this is where the idea of architecture that's contextual and landscape that's sort of coexisting with it becomes a very strong force of coming together. And that's how most of our works are, and that's how we think.
Right. I think you rightly said. I mean, be like respecting nature or nature being a part of our built space has always been in the Indian culture. So we don't really have to learn anything new, but I think just get back to our roots and really understand how nature has always played an important role in all of our living spaces, all the built spaces. So I think that's a
True.
really delicate point and a delicate line that we have to, I think, touch upon to, and that makes the designs even better for everyone.
Right. And one more thing we realized, in between, there were a few years where, like I said earlier, when we were in this state of exploration of taking on most of the projects that we could just say yes to, we realized that we were not enjoying this process of just greenwashing, where you just put some plants and it look like it's something has changed. It's honestly not as simple as that. We also worked on a project called Vanam, which was one of our experiments on looking at housing at an urban level, where we felt that it has to become the greenest project in the city, where each each user actually has 30 to 35% of open space, although these units were just 1,000 square feet each, 2 BHKs on 5 floors. I think about 20 users, 20 families coming together. One of the things that we were trying to experiment was to give a large space for landscape where it becomes a part of your home and you start taking care of it. And we went to this extent of defining how each home can sort of respond to productive greens and detail everything out in terms of the structure of it, in terms of how the whole build becomes an important part of the structure itself. So you're not compelled to worry about leakages and maintenance and all that. And unfortunately, it didn't turn out the way we thought. We, in fact, bought a flat there only to be a part of that whole process for life, saying, let us also experiment and see how green can it be. And unfortunately, we realized that the architecture of it and the idea of it got a lot of people who probably did not realize what Vanam meant because it was a developer project and because it looked nice in terms of how it was designed, conceptualized, and built. People didn't realize the sort of responsibility that it came with, where it meant that the balconies were actually meant to be green, large green pockets or large green terraces. So that's when you realize that a lot of the times the responsibilities that come with greens or the way you look at architecture and landscape, it needs to be a stronger commitment from everyone rather than just looking at it as planter beds and greens coming out, etc. And we realize more and more that the responsibility actually lies with everyone who's living there. It's like maintaining your home, like you clean and wash and things like that. Landscape also requires that sort of a push. And that project for us was a big learning when we realized that we thought that everybody would sort of align to that idea of having a fantastic landscape as a part of of your floor at every level. We realized that people were not so committed, and so the greens went out in the first couple of months itself, and only a few flats, including the one that we have there, is so green it feels like a forest. But the rest of it, we realized that you need committed people or people who are super excited to be a part of that whole process, and then it works better.
I think we still lack, that a little awareness that is still required in people to either be aware about the taking care of it. I think you rightly said that these green pockets maybe or landscape comes with a sense of responsibility that they need to be cultivated and grown right. They need to be taken care of.
Yeah, I think as long as you realize you are a human, I think that realization should be more than enough to understand what greens mean. So I think
Right.
I don't want to add anything more on that, but that's as simple as it can be.
Right, right. So, as we talk about these experiences and the way people live in that building, so architecture is definitely all about experiences. We strive to create experiential spaces for people. So, how do you view the importance of experiential design elements in any of the projects that you work on?
I've realized over time that if I look back on buildings that I remember or buildings that have made an impact, it has always been about experiences, not just about seeing or being in a place. It talks about experiences that the architect has also gone through to make that happen. And because we read a lot, and or let's say because you would sort of understand what a building is by reading more about it, you also realize that there are a lot of things that are an extension of many other parts of, let's say, the architect or the guy who gave you the brief and so many other things. And these are moments you realize that it starts making a difference on the actual work or the kind of impact. So the experience that you're talking about is not just our own personal experience, it's also about the experience of so many people and their own personal soul coming into that place. And you start realizing this when you look at architecture from the past, even temples or forts or so many other places. You realize that the experience that you're talking about is a culmination of many things, and it's interesting to dissect that through each project. Even the newer buildings that you see, you realize it's not about just how you feel, it's also about how that space starts to impact you on a very personal level. And that feeling is extraordinary and tells you the power of architecture, and it tells you how deep the idea of a building is, especially when you're doing it right. And if there is a strong narrative, then there's so much to take back, or there's so much to give back from that experience.
Architecture actually has, like as we say that architecture stays for generations. I mean, something that we design today is going to stay for at least 50 to 60 years ahead in time. So if we are doing that, why not make it something that everyone is able to, I think, even enjoy and resonate to at some point, that okay, this is something that I resonate with. So I think that is what matters a lot when it comes to designing spaces.
So true.
So, with the advancements in technology and the rapidly evolving ways the technology is working these days, how do you leverage the power of technology to enhance your design process while still maintaining this organic and human-centered quality that defines your work?
Uh, I think I'll put it in a slightly different way and not talk
Yeah,
about AI and all that, because I
right.
think it's there in every single forum that you can think about. I think one of the things that became a very important realization for us was the idea of the complexity that our buildings or most buildings have, and how we have not this cracked that whole idea of making it happen seamlessly. Meaning, if there's a great idea that you have worked on and you have a brilliant design team or a studio that's super focused on the idea of the design or the story or the narrative, we realize that the next set of things that happen in terms of detailed drawings, in terms of breaking down that idea, or talking about the split of parts like you would have for each project, I feel that was a moment which needs a lot of technique and technology, and that's where our focus is. Now, when I talk about it, I'm saying that the initial part of a process in every project is driven by a lot of other things other than technology. To be really honest, I think the idea of crafting a narrative, the idea of being able to think, the idea of being able to come together as a studio and brainstorm, or push yourself into the past of India, for example, or look at stories, has never been a problem for us. I think that's a strong point. People come to us for that, and that's where we don't look at the idea of technology. We look at more human interventions uh, in that stage where we're crafting narratives. I think that's a very important phase for us. The next part is where we use technology, where we're looking at softwares, where we're looking to simplify how architecture is going from that idea of a design stage to that point where you're starting to look at getting it built. So for us, the idea of technology actually comes in the second phase, where we break a project down into kit of parts, simplify it, use multiple things to understand it, and then the last phase where it goes into execution, or getting it built or getting something built, is also the time where we are tracking things using softwares, making things a lot more seamless now, because we realize that a lot of the projects that we do are mid to large scale and have their own set of complexities. So I think we're trying to cut down on human intervention in terms of tracking the project, tracking drawings, understanding where we are in terms of a project, in terms of its timeline and things like that. So that's where technology is being used by us at this moment, not in the initial part, which people get excited about. I think people, us as humans, I think we enjoy the process of storytelling. I think that's something that we are very attached to.
Right, right, right. It's a really different answer, and I really enjoyed listening to this because with time, I think we are somewhere losing that touch of concept development, which is the very basis of any architectural design. So when that is strong enough, I think technology is there just to help us ease up that construction process or the execution process that is going to happen. So I think that's the best part about technology. It's easing up human efforts to some level, which were used for the execution part. So that's where I think technology
Yeah,
can be used in a greater way.
right, right.
Yes. So as we spoke about your projects, about your design development, or how you derive designs, I want to really know, how do you find a sense of fulfillment and purpose in your work as an architect beyond just the completion of projects?
I think architecture is a calling, right? Like,
Right.
it's not for, I can't say it's not for everyone, but I think when you're in it, I think you have to be obsessed with the idea of being able to be there and do so many things. You would never have this question to, let's say, A.R. Rahman or someone who's in a creative field, but that sense of continuity that we have, or like how most of the creative studios have, is extraordinary. I think not sometimes wanting to disconnect. I'm talking about the thought, not about work, but in terms of being able to be living that life and having that continuity, or living in this sort of a continuum as an artist, as an architect, is something that gives us a kick, and that's what we live for. I think all other things are a byproduct of that thought process. So for me, on a very personal level, I think if you're asking me about the idea of fulfillment, in whichever way you would want to coin it, I think uh, architecture as a calling is an extraordinary expression of fulfillment. I think everything else is an add-on. Everything else is sometimes a byproduct. So I think it's an extraordinary movement for us, also in terms of where and how we are living. And I think we respect that. I know there's a lot that we can give back to the nation in terms of design and in terms of giving back to the city and being able to craft extraordinary narratives and being able to sort of also look back at the other influences like I said, music, books, and cinema. I think those are also in a way are outlets, or those are also things that sort of allow us to push in different slow different directions. So in a way I think that's my answer. I don't know if it is sort of simplifying your question of whether architecture is fulfilling, or is there something that you do beyond architecture that sort of fulfills the idea of, or look at this idea of completeness. And I think there's a lot that architecture has, and I think you can never let go of that thought.
Right. You rightly said, I mean, architecture is a creative field with a responsibility. So I think at one time we are juggling with so many things. And you, as you said, that if there's no calling, architecture is a calling. So unless or until someone doesn't have it, I think staying true to this field would get really tough if there's no calling that you're feeling towards this field and the responsibilities that come with it.
True, and I think we all live one life,
Right.
and I think it's important to sort of understand what your true calling is.
Mm. Definitely.
And if you get that right, I think it changes your life. I think it changes the
Definitely.
way you think, and then I don't think anything can be as fulfilling as having realized that, or being in that awareness
Right.
of of that idea of living with your true sense of calling.
Right. That what I'm doing is right. That sense of self belief that you need, I think that is really important to go ahead.
True.
Right. So, with your career on a rise, what are your next steps? Like, where do you envision yourself and your practice in the coming years?
Oh, I realize that a lot of our uh, time in these last few years has actually gone into analyzing a lot of things rather than us setting a goal, saying this is what we want to do in life. I think because we've always been working throughout, even when we started, when it was just Aditi and me, to a point of time now where we are about 35, 40 people as a studio, we're still constantly working. And I think uh, the idea of uh, taking some time to sort of pause and be aware of where we are right now has always been how do I put it? Like it's always been a consistent process in these last couple of months or a year. And during this process, we started writing down a lot of things because all these years we were going with the flow. Although there were a lot of realizations that were happening during our first 10 years and even later now, we realized that once we started writing a lot of things down, uh, rather than saying we want to do this or we want to give back uh, to the fraternity, etc., we realized we wanted to understand ourselves first. So I think we are in that process right now where there's a lot of awareness and understanding of ourselves. And I think where do we head from here is something that will be an extension of what we're writing, meaning there's so much that's going on in our minds right now, and even as a studio, that we're trying to collate all this together to reach a point where I will have an answer for that. so, so what it actually means is I don't think we can define who we are or where we're heading. What it essentially means that we are enjoying that whole journey, and I think this journey, with its share of ups and downs, is fantastic, and the kind of kick that we get out of being in this whole idea of of doing so many things. We always feel we are living multiple lives in a day.
Right.
It also tells you how busy we are as people, as a studio, but at the same time, we are always looking for this humor to sort of set itself in, or dark humor sometimes to set itself in. So, are we living with a sense of purpose? Yes, of course. Are we living with a sense of understanding of where we are heading? To an extent, yes. Do we have a plan for the future? A lot of things that we want to give back. Although we are still very young, there's so much more to do.
Yes.
We've only been in the as a studio for 13, 14 years, so it's just the beginning of many people's lives,
Right.
and it tells you that the kind of uh, process of being able to do so many things actually also comes back to this idea of the studio, where the people who are part of the studio matter a lot. For us, I think one of the major realizations that we had, which also is one thing that I really want to push more and more, is the idea of people and the idea of practice. So maybe that's one of the goals that I've set for myself, is to build an extraordinary practice with a great sense of commitment to having great human beings in the practice for us, great human beings as a part of our studio. And that's one of the things that we always set for ourselves, saying the first thing that you need to be a part of our studio is to be a great human being first. And everything else is secondary. Everything else will follow. Your commitment to work, thoughts, being intellectual, being able to have fun, and also being able to let yourself loose when required. So all these are an extension of most of us,
Hmm.
and I think uh, that's one of the things that we want to do, is build a stronger practice and give back to people, both through our practice in the studio and outside through our work. And I think that's probably the goal that has always been a part of us.
Right. Definitely. It's growing together is what matters, I feel at times, because it's the people and the team that we all work towards a same goal. So when that is happening, I think we are all moving towards the same goal. That is where we find our purpose as well of what we are doing and where we want to go ahead.
That's true. And we realized that it took us many years to also understand this idea of what the culture of the office is, or what's the
Right.
culture of the studio. So we actually built something called the culture code,
Okay.
and we made a small book out of it, which is of course within ourselves now.
Right.
Is for people to understand how we started, who we are, how did we think, how do we think,
Right.
and so many other things that were all sort of combined, and we built this whole culture code for the studio so that you enjoy this process of being with us, and then you also realize the thoughts that make us who we are.
Right.
So I think that's sort of an extension of one of the things that we want to do stronger and better
Right.
for the future.
Yes, definitely, definitely. So, as we come to the end of our interview, what would be your one piece of advice to all our young listeners, or if they are students listening to this, what would be your one piece of advice related to life, architecture, design, anything?
I think one of the things, like I said, which is a very important part of our process of having someone with us, is to be a great human being first. And I think, like I said, everything else will follow. I think the second thing that we've always talked about in the studio is this idea to give back. A lot of the people, when they come to us or when we meet, they say, I want to learn. Like everyone says, I'm joining you and we like your work and I'm here to learn. And my answer has always been, believe that you can give back. It's not about just taking, it's about being able to give back. So the moment you start having this realization that I want to give back, learning becomes a part of that whole process. So I think the moment you come out with this thought that I want to be a student for life, or I want to keep learning and all that, I think it should be about giving back first, and everything else becomes a part of that whole process, because then you learn, then you fail, then you fall, and then you get up, and then you're still able to do so much.
Right.
So I think believing in this idea of being able to give back builds a fantastic sense of confidence
Hmm.
or a sense of commitment for you as a human being. And I think nothing can beat that. I think, along with being a great human being first, I think this is one important aspect that we always focused on. Telling people that no matter who you are, even if you're an intern,
Hmm.
I think there's a lot that you can give back. And the more you believe in yourself, the more you will realize that there's so much more in being able to do than just take.
Right.
And I think that probably sums up the way we think as people, as a student.
Right. It has been wonderful talking to you, and we spoke about so many things about, and that did not limit to the design philosophy or the way you design it. It encircled everything around architecture and how we are supposed to give back. I think what we learn. So the last point that you said is definitely going. I'm going to take this back with me. So it was wonderful talking to you and having you on our platform. And thank you so much for this wonderful interview that we had. And I hope you enjoyed this interview as well.
Yes, Simran. I think a lot of the things that I was talking also came from the fact that I'm slowly becoming aware that it's my birthday in 2 or 3 days. so there is this so there's this idea of being a little more conscious when you're turning a year older, and that's when you realize that okay, a lot of the answers or a lot of the things that I was talking about was also coming from this sense of uh, uh, being aware of a lot of other things at this moment. So it was more driven by the idea of a very personal thought process
Right.
rather than the idea of having an answer from just being an architect. So I think a lot of it was an extension of where I am right now and or what I'm thinking. So it was great talking to you as well, and all the best to you.
Yes, thank you so much and wishing you happy birthday in advance.
Thanks.
Yes. So looking
Great
forward to
talking to you.
more such collaborations, and thank you so much for sparing out time from your busy schedule for us, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.